The glass hit the floor not with a crash, but with a flat, wet slap. Amber liquid, the last of a good whiskey, spread like a dark stain across the dusty concrete. Silence followed, thick and immediate, swallowing the low murmur of the off-duty operators. Every eye in the cramped makeshift bar turned toward the source. A young, broad-shouldered man with a flushed face and a sneer that was more insecurity than malice, and the woman he had just shoved. She had not stumbled. Her feet, planted in worn leather boots, had shifted less than an inch, her body absorbing the force with an unnatural stillness. Her own glass remained steady in her hand, its contents barely sloshing against the rim. She looked at the shattered glass on the floor, then at the man's chest, then finally at his eyes. Her expression was unreadable, a placid mask of calm that seemed to infuriate him more than any verbal retort could have. He was used to reactions, fear, anger, submission. He was not used to being observed like a problem in fluid dynamics. The pressure in the room built a physical thing. Someone coughed. Someone else shifted their weight. The scrape of a boot loud in the quiet. The young man, Specialist Cole, puffed out his chest. He was new to this unit, eager to establish his place in the hierarchy through the time-honored currency of aggression. He had mistaken her quiet presence, her plain clothes, her lack of participation in their loud stories of conquest, for weakness. He had seen an outsider, a civilian analyst perhaps, or some logistics officer out of her depth, and decided she was a target. His shove had been a test, a casual assertion of dominance. Her lack of response was a failure of that test, a miscalculation that was now unraveling in front of his peers. He had expected her to fall, to cry out, to spill her drink. Instead, she stood like a rock in a river, the current of his arrogance parting around her. Her gaze held his, calm and analytical, and in that gaze, he felt a flicker of something he did not recognize, a cold, deep competence that had nothing to do with muscle and everything to do with will. He had made a mistake. He did not know the shape of it yet, but the silence of the men around him, men who normally would have laughed and cheered him on, told him it was a significant one. The air grew heavy with unspoken questions. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her whiskey, her eyes never leaving his. The only sound was the soft click of her glass returning to the scarred wooden bar top. One must learn that the loudest person in the room is often the least dangerous. The place called itself the Wolf's Denver. It was less a bar and more a temporary structure of plywood and corrugated steel dropped onto the perimeter of forward operating base Kestrel, a windswept outpost in a country whose name changed depending on the decade's politics. Dust, fine as powdered sugar, coated every surface, a constant reminder of the vast, unforgiving desert that stretched for 1,000 miles in every direction. The air inside was thick with the smell of stale beer, sweat, and ozone from the humming generators that powered the single string of yellow bulbs overhead. This was a place for decompression, a pressure valve for men living on a razor's edge. Tonight, the valve was being tested. The woman, Rear Admiral Anya Sharma, was here under the guise of a strategic oversight review. She wore simple canvas trousers and a gray Henley, her dark hair pulled back in a severe knot. Her rank insignia was tucked away in a locker, her identity known only to the base commanding officer and his most senior non-commissioned officer, Master Chief Petty Officer Thorne. To the dozen or so operators of Naval Special Warfare Development Group's Echo Squadron gathered here, she was a nameless, faceless presence from headquarters, someone to be tolerated and ignored. They were the tip of the spear. She was, in their eyes, the bureaucracy that held the shaft. Master Chief Thorne sat at the far end of the bar, nursing a bottle of water, his face a roadmap of hard-won experience. He watched the scene unfold with a practiced neutrality, but his eyes, missing nothing, held a glint of weary anticipation. He had seen this ritual play out 100 times. A new operator, full of fire and synthetic confidence from training, would try to carve out his territory. Specialist Cole was just the latest iteration of a timeless archetype. He was big, fast, and exceptionally strong, a superb physical specimen who had excelled in every quantifiable test. But Thorne knew that the things that kept you alive out here were not quantifiable. They were things like patience, humility, and the wisdom to know which fights to pick. Cole, in his youthful arrogance, had just picked a fight with a ghost. The other men in the room, Harris and Reyes chief among them, formed a loose circle around Cole, their postures a mixture of encouragement and nervous curiosity. They were his cohort, his pack. They saw Sharma as he did. An intrusion. A woman in their space, not one of their own, not a medic or a pilot or an intelligence specialist they had come to trust, but an unknown variable. Her silence was unnerving to them. They communicated in loud boasts and sharp-edged jokes, a constant broadcast of their own confidence. She communicated in stillness, and it was a language they did not understand. Sharma felt their scrutiny as a physical weight. She had been in rooms like this her entire career. Rooms that smelled of damp gear and masculine pride. Rooms where her presence was an anomaly, a disruption to the natural order. Early in her career, it had angered her. Later, it had frustrated her. Now, it was simply data to be processed. The hostility was a diagnostic tool. It told her everything she needed to know about a unit's discipline, cohesion, and leadership. Echo Squadron, for all its legendary skill, was showing cracks. There was a rot of ego at its core, personified by the young man standing before her, whose knuckles were white where he gripped the edge of the bar. He was a product of a system that selected for physical prowess and aggression, but sometimes failed to temper it with the necessary restraint. She knew his file. Cole Daniel, 26 years old, top of his class in every physical metric. 2 successful deployments in a conventional unit before being recruited into the development group. Commended for bravery. Reprimanded twice for insubordination. He was a weapon that had not yet been properly calibrated. And he was about to receive a field adjustment. The tension had started an hour earlier. Cole, holding court at the center of the bar, had been recounting a recent training exercise, his voice growing louder with each retelling, each detail more heroic. He spoke of a simulated hostage rescue, embellishing his own role, describing a direct, brute force entry that, in his telling, was a work of tactical genius. Sharma, sitting alone, had listened quietly. She had read the after-action report. The simulation had been a failure. Cole's genius breach had triggered a booby trap, resulting in the theoretical deaths of 2 teammates and all 3 hostages. His version of the story omitted this inconvenient conclusion. The analyst said we should have gone in quiet, through the vents. Cole scoffed, loud enough for the entire room to hear. He glanced directly at Sharma. What do they know? Sitting in a climate-controlled box 1,000 miles away, looking at satellite photos. You don't win fights by being quiet. You win them by being faster and more violent than the other guy. Harris and Reyes nodded in vigorous agreement, their expressions mirroring Cole's contempt for the non-combatants, the support structure they viewed as a necessary but inferior caste. Sharma gave no reaction. She simply swirled the whiskey in her glass, her gaze distant. Her lack of response was a vacuum, and Cole's ego rushed to fill it. He saw her as the embodiment of the cautious, bloodless bureaucracy he despised. He strode over to her, planting his hands on the bar on either side of her, trapping her in his personal space. The smell of stale beer and exertion washed over her. "Something boring you, ma'am?" he asked. The word ma'am, a deliberate insult, dripping with condescension. "Or are you just taking notes for your next PowerPoint presentation on synergy?" Sharma slowly raised her eyes to meet his. Her voice, when she spoke, was low and even, devoid of any emotion. "I am observing," she said. "Observing what?" he pressed, leaning closer. The difference between a story and a fact, a flicker of anger crossed Cole's face. He was not used to being challenged, however subtly. His world was one of clear hierarchies and loud affirmations. Her quiet, analytical defiance was an attack he did not know how to parry. "And what fact is that?" Harris called out from behind him, goading him on. "The fact," Sharma said, her eyes still locked on Cole's, "that a failed mission is still a failure. No matter how loudly you celebrate it, the truth of the statement hit the room like a physical blow." The laughter died. Cole's face darkened, the flush of alcohol replaced by the pale cast of fury. He had been exposed. his heroic narrative punctured by a single, quiet sentence. His pride, the fragile armature on which his entire identity was built, had been fractured. He needed to reassert himself, to reclaim his dominance through the only method he truly understood. "You don't know anything about us," he snarled, his voice dropping to a growl. "You pencil pushers are all the same. You think you understand this world because you read a report." He straightened up, his shadow falling over her. "You have no idea what it takes." And then he shoved her. Not a playful push, but a hard, deliberate shove with the heel of his hand against her shoulder, meant to send her stumbling backward, to humiliate her, to put her physically in her place. It was a flagrant breach of discipline, an act of assault that crossed a line from posturing to criminality. He expected her to fall. He expected his friends to laugh. He expected the matter to be settled. He was wrong on all counts. The shove connected with her shoulder, and for a microsecond, Cole felt the familiar sensation of his strength meeting yielding flesh. Then, something was wrong. It was like pushing against a steel column wrapped in cloth. She did not stumble. She did not fall. Her body absorbed the impact, her core tightening, her weight sinking into the floor. The force he had exerted, meant to throw her off balance, simply dissipated into her frame. Before his brain could process this impossibility, her body moved. It was not a violent reaction, but a fluid, almost gentle unfolding of biomechanical principles. Her left hand, the one not holding the whiskey glass, came up. It did not strike him. It simply cupped his right elbow, the one connected to the arm he had used to push her. Her thumb found the precise nerve cluster on the inside of his joint. Simultaneously, her right foot pivoted slightly, shifting her center of gravity. She leaned forward, not into him, but with him, flowing with the momentum he had created. Cole felt a sudden electric shock travel up his arm. His fingers went numb, his wrist lost all strength. His brain screamed at his arm to pull back, to tense up, but the connection was severed. Her movement was economical, almost lazy. She turned his own forward momentum into a rotational force, using his elbow as a pivot point. His body, all 220 pounds of trained muscle, was suddenly and inexplicably spiraling. He was no longer in control of his own mass. His feet left the floor. The room tilted crazily. He saw the ceiling, then the faces of his stunned teammates, then the dusty concrete floor rushing up to meet him. There was no pain, just a profound sense of confusion. She guided his fall. Her grip on his elbow ensured he did not land on his head or shoulder. She laid him on the ground as if placing a fragile object on a shelf. He landed on his back with a heavy thud that knocked the wind from his lungs. The entire sequence had taken less than 2 seconds. Sharma stood over him, her stance unchanged, her whiskey glass still perfectly level in her other hand. She had not spilled a drop. She looked down at him, her expression still neutral, still analytical. The silence in the bar was now absolute, a ringing void. Harris and Reyes were frozen in place, their jaws slack. Master Chief Thorne, at the far end of the bar, slowly took a sip of his water. A small, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. He had seen it before. He knew what it was. The purest expression of skill, where economy of motion replaced brute force. It was the art of using an opponent's strength against them, of turning aggression into a self-defeating liability. Cole gasped for air, his mind struggling to reconcile what had just happened. He had been a wrestler in high school, a champion grappler. He had engaged in hand-to-hand combat training against some of the most dangerous men in the world. No one had ever handled him like that. It was not a fight. It was a physics lesson, and he had been the demonstration. Sharma took a small step back, giving him space. She looked away from him, her gaze sweeping over the other men in the room. Her eyes lingered on Harris, then Reyes. Their bravado had evaporated, replaced by a mixture of shock and a dawning, uncomfortable respect. They were predators, and they had just witnessed a higher order of predation. One that was quiet, efficient, and utterly devoid of ego. "Your center of gravity was too high," she said, her voice calm and instructional, as if she were critiquing a trainee in a sterile gymnasium. You overcommit on the push. You left your entire right side exposed, she paused, taking a deliberate sip of her whiskey. Never sacrifice your balance for a show of force. She placed her glass back on the bar with a quiet click. Cole pushed himself up onto his elbows, shame and confusion warring on his face. He had tried to make her a target and had instead become an object lesson. He had brought a club to a surgical theater. The door to the wolf's den slammed open, and a frantic communications technician stood silhouetted against the harsh exterior lights, his chest heaving. All personnel, report to the Tactical Operations Center. Now, this is not a drill. Alarms blared across the base, a pulsating, urgent shriek that cut through the thick tension in the bar. The operators, their shock momentarily forgotten, snapped into motion. Muscle memory took over. They moved with a trained, instinctual grace, their personal dispute instantly relegated to the background by the clarion call of a real-world crisis. The communications technician, a young man with wide, panicked eyes, repeated his message. Scythe is down. I repeat, Scythe is down. A cold dread settled over the room, far more chilling than the earlier confrontation. Scythe was the code name for an unmanned aerial vehicle, but not just any drone. It was a high-altitude, long-endurance surveillance platform, a stealthy, billion-dollar asset packed with some of the nation's most sensitive sensor and communications technology. It was their eye in the sky, their guardian angel. And it was gone. They converged on the Tactical Operations Center, a semi-permanent structure humming with the power of dozens of computer terminals and servers. The air was cool and smelled of recycled air and hot electronics. On the main screen, a satellite map of the region dominated the wall. A blinking red icon marked the last known position of the drone, deep within a treacherous mountain range known to the locals as the Dragon's Teeth. The base commanding officer, a grizzled Navy captain named Miller, was already there, his face grim. He was shouting into a satellite phone, his voice strained. He slammed the receiver down. Lightning storm took it out. A full system failure. It went down hard in the Almas Valley. He pointed to a deep, jagged canyon on the map. We have a problem. That valley is controlled by Aslan Kadyrov's militia. They're well-armed. They know the terrain. And they've been waiting for a prize like this to fall into their laps. Master Chief Thorne stood beside him, his expression unreadable. What's the status of the asset? Captain Miller shook his head. The self-destruct sequence failed. The entire technology package is intact. If Kadyrov gets his hands on it, he'll sell it to the highest bidder within hours. We cannot let that happen. He swept his gaze across the assembled operators of Echo Squadron. We have one window. That storm is getting worse. Air assets are grounded for at least the next 12 hours. It has to be a ground insertion. Your mission is to move to the crash site, secure the sensitive components, specifically the optics core and the data link module, and destroy the rest of the airframe. You will evade all contact if possible. The rules of engagement are restrictive. This is a recovery, not an assault. Cole, Harris, and Reyes stood at the front, their earlier bravado replaced by a focused intensity. This was their world. This was what they were trained for. The embarrassment from the bar was a distant memory, a triviality in the face of a live mission. What's our insertion point? Cole asked, his voice crisp and professional. Captain Miller pointed to a spot on the map, several miles from the crash site. We can get you here by ground vehicle, but the rest is on foot. The terrain is hell. Steep inclines, loose scree, and zero visibility in this storm. Sharma had entered the Tactical Operations Center behind the others, standing quietly at the back of the room. She listened, her mind processing the variables. The storm, the terrain, the enemy disposition, the asset's condition. She was no longer an anonymous observer. She was a commander assessing a tactical problem. Captain Miller suddenly collapsed, clutching his chest and gasping for air. The base medic rushed to his side. Heart attack, he yelled. I need a medevac. But the storm had grounded all helicopters. The highest-ranking officer on the base was now incapacitated, leaving a critical leadership vacuum at the worst possible moment. The squadron's own lieutenant was on leave. Master Chief Thorne, as the senior enlisted man, stepped forward, but protocol dictated an officer had to be in command. All eyes fell on the squadron's next senior operator, a petty officer with experience, but not in mission command. Panic began to creep into the edges of the room. The mission clock was ticking, and they were leaderless. The storm hit the mountains with the force of a physical blow. What had been a high-altitude electrical disturbance had descended into a furious blizzard, a whiteout of wind and ice that was rare but devastating in this high-desert region. The temperature plummeted. The wind howled through the canyons, tearing at the rocky landscape. The ground convoy dropped Echo Squadron at the designated insertion point, the vehicle's headlights barely penetrating the swirling snow. Then they were alone. Visibility was less than 10 feet. The advanced navigation equipment, their link to the Global Positioning System satellites, flickered and died, rendered useless by the intense atmospheric interference. They were left with a map, a compass, and the instincts honed by years of training. The environment had become the primary enemy. The cold was a physical entity, seeping through their advanced tactical gear, numbing fingers and draining resolve. Every breath was a painful intake of frozen air. The terrain, a treacherous mix of sharp rock and loose shale, was now coated in a growing layer of ice, making every step a calculated risk. A fall here would mean a broken bone, a liability the team could not afford. Cole, chafing under the sudden lack of clear leadership, took the initiative. "We go direct," he argued, his voice muffled by his face mask. "Straight line to the objective. We push through the storm." Fast and hard. Harris and Reyes nodded, their trust in Cole's aggressive instincts unwavering. They saw the storm as an obstacle to be overcome by sheer force of will. Sharma, who had geared up and joined the team without a word, stood slightly apart. She held a simple, analog compass in her gloved hand, its needle quivering. She studied the paper map, its surface protected by a plastic sleeve, her face illuminated by the faint red light of her headlamp. "A direct route takes us over that ridge," she said, her voice cutting through the wind. She pointed into the white void. "The map shows a sheer drop on the far side. In these conditions, with no visibility, it's a death trap. We'll walk right off a cliff." "We can use ropes," Cole countered, his tone dismissive. "We're trained for mountain operations. Rappelling in a zero-visibility blizzard with 50-mile-per-hour crosswinds is not a tactical choice," Sharma stated flatly. "It's suicide. The wind will turn you into a pendulum and smash you against the rock face. Your ropes will freeze. Your anchors won't hold in the ice." Her assessment was cold, clinical, and utterly devoid of doubt. It was not an opinion. It was a statement of fact based on a superior understanding of physics and environmental hazards. Some of the other team members looked from Cole to her, their confidence in a direct assault wavering. They had all felt the power of the wind. They knew deep down that she was right. Master Chief Thorne, who had been quietly observing the exchange, stepped forward. "She's right," he said, his voice a low rumble that carried authority. "I've lost men in conditions half this bad. A frontal assault on this weather is a losing fight." Cole's frustration boiled over. "So what do we do? Sit here and freeze? Kadyrov's men are probably already on their way." The digital systems had failed. The brute force approach was suicidal. The chain of command was broken. They were isolated, blind, and running out of time. The environment had stripped them of their technological advantages and their standard operating procedures, leaving them with only their raw skill and the quality of their decisions. And in that moment, the most important decision was who to follow. The man who advocated for a reckless charge, or the quiet woman who understood the true nature of the enemy they now faced, the mountain itself. "There is another way," Sharma said, her voice steady against the howling wind. She tapped a thin, winding line on the map. "This is a seasonal riverbed, a wadi. It runs parallel to the ridge and ends up in the same valley as the crash site. It will be sheltered from the worst of the wind. The path will be longer, but it will be safer and faster than trying to go over the top," Cole scoffed. "A riverbed? In a storm? That's a flash flood zone. We'll be washed away." "Not in this temperature," Sharma countered without missing a beat. The precipitation is snow and ice, not rain. The ground is frozen solid. There will be no runoff. The wadi is our best option. It provides concealment and cover from the wind. Her logic was a fortress. Every argument Cole presented, she dismantled with a calm, irrefutable fact. She was not asking for their agreement. She was laying out the tactical reality of their situation. She spoke of wind shear, thermal dynamics, and geological formations with the same dispassionate clarity she had used to describe his flawed center of gravity back at the bar. This was her true battle space. The intersection of strategy, environment, and human factors. Thorne looked at the younger operators. He saw the doubt in their eyes, the dawning realization that Cole's aggression, so valuable in a firefight, was a liability here. They needed a strategist, not just a warrior. "The woman has a plan," Thorne said, his voice leaving no room for debate. "We're burning time. We follow her lead." He looked directly at Sharma. "Give us the route." Sharma did not seize the moment with a triumphant speech. She did not declare herself in charge. She simply became the leader by being the most competent person in the group. She issued a series of quiet, precise commands. "Reyes, you take point. Use your thermal imager. It might give us a few extra feet of visibility on any heat signatures. Harris, you're on rear security. Everyone else, maintain 5-meter intervals. Sound discipline. No talking unless necessary. We move along the west wall of the wadi. It will offer the most protection from the wind." The men, including a reluctant and humiliated Cole, fell into formation. They followed her down the treacherous slope into the mouth of the dry riverbed. The difference was immediate and profound. The force of the wind dropped by half, its roar diminishing to a manageable moan. The swirling snow became a steady, vertical fall. They could see further, move faster. Sharma's plan was working. She moved near the center of the formation, her head on a constant swivel, her senses attuned to the subtle shifts in the environment. She noticed the way the snowdrifts formed, indicating the prevailing wind direction. She identified sections of the path that were likely to be covered in slick ice. She was not just navigating. She was reading the landscape, interpreting its language in a way that the others, with their reliance on technology, had forgotten how to do. After an hour of grueling but steady progress, Reyes held up a hand, signaling a halt. He pointed ahead. Through the snow, a faint, intermittent light was visible. A campfire. Kadyrov's men. Someone whispered over the radio. They must be holed up, waiting out the storm. Cole immediately tensed. "Let's take them," he hissed. "A fast, violent assault. We clear them and move on." "Negative." Sharma's voice came back over the comms, cold and firm. "There are 3 of them. Patrol. They are not at the crash site. Engaging them is an unnecessary risk. It creates noise, it costs ammunition, and it alerts any other patrols in the area to our presence. We are not here to fight them. We are here for the asset." She had already formulated a new plan. "We go high. We climb the eastern wall of the wadi here, bypass their position, and descend back into the riverbed 100 meters past them. We use the storm for cover. They will never know we were here." Her authority was now absolute. No one questioned her. They had seen her first plan work perfectly. They had seen her logic dismantle Cole's reckless impulses. They were beginning to understand that her quietness was not weakness, but a profound and focused discipline. She was in command not because of rank, but because in this unforgiving environment, her brand of competence was the only currency that mattered. The climb up the wadi wall was treacherous. Ice-slicked rock offered little purchase for their boots and gloved hands. Every movement had to be deliberate, every handhold tested before being trusted. Sharma led the bypass, moving with a climber's economy of motion, her body low to the rock, her balance impeccable. She guided the team across a narrow ledge, the flickering light of the militia's campfire visible below them. Their voices a faint murmur carried on the wind. Cole struggled behind her. His larger, more muscular frame was a disadvantage on the narrow ledge. His movements were jerky, his breathing ragged with exertion and frustration. He was out of his element, a creature of explosive power forced into a situation that demanded quiet precision. As they began their descent back into the riverbed past the enemy patrol, a section of loose shale gave way under Cole's boot. He slid, his body lurching sideways, a small avalanche of rock clattering down into the darkness. Below, one of the militiamen stood up, peering into the swirling snow, his rifle held at the ready. He shouted something in his native language. The other two men scrambled for their weapons. The team was compromised. Cole froze, halfway down the slope, completely exposed. The militiaman raised his rifle, its weapon-mounted flashlight cutting a bright, wavering beam through the snow. The light swept back and forth, searching for the source of the noise. In a heartbeat, the tactical situation had changed. Sharma did not hesitate. She did not issue a command. She acted. She was already in a stable, braced position. Her own rifle came up, the movement so smooth and practiced it seemed to happen in slow motion. She did not use her rifle's advanced optic, knowing it would be useless in the dense snowfall. She sighted along the barrel, a skill considered antiquated by many, but one she had mastered. The militiaman's light swept past Cole, then started to swing back. Sharma's rifle cracked once, the sound sharp and instantly swallowed by the wind. The flashlight beam jerked toward the sky and then extinguished. The man fell without a sound. Before the other two militiamen could react to their comrade's collapse, two more shots rang out in quick succession. One from Master Chief Thorne, the other from Reyes. The remaining two figures crumpled to the ground. Silence returned, broken only by the howl of the wind. The entire engagement had lasted less than 3 seconds. It was a testament to the team's training, but the first critical shot had been Sharma's. It had been a shot made under extreme pressure, in near-zero visibility, at a moving target, to save the life of the man who had assaulted and humiliated her just hours before. Cole scrambled the rest of the way down the slope, his face pale. He looked at the spot where the militiaman had fallen, then back up at Sharma. He understood what had just happened. She had not only saved his life, but she had done so with a level of calm, precise lethality that he had only ever read about. Her shot was not aggressive. It was corrective. It was the solution to a tactical problem he had created. There was no celebration, no backslapping. Sharma was already moving, her rifle at a low ready, her eyes scanning the darkness. "Check the bodies for intel," she ordered, her voice as calm as if she were ordering coffee. "Then we move. Their main force will have heard those shots, no matter how muffled." Our timeline just got shorter. The team moved with a new sense of urgency and a profound, unspoken shift in their internal dynamics. They were no longer following a set of logical instructions. They were following a leader whose competence had just been proven in blood and ice. Cole fell into line behind her, his earlier arrogance completely stripped away, replaced by a quiet, focused humility. He watched the way she moved, the way she observed, trying to understand the source of her quiet, unshakable authority. He had defined strength by the force of the blow. He was now learning that true strength lay in the perfect stillness that came before it. They found the wreckage of the drone in a small, cratered clearing at the base of a cliff. The airframe was a twisted sculpture of carbon fiber and shattered metal, half buried in the snow. The storm was beginning to subside, the wind's shriek softening to a low moan, the snowfall thinning. A tense, eerie silence hung over the crash site. Sharma immediately established a perimeter, positioning the team in a defensive circle around the wreckage. Thorne, Reyes, begin extracting the core components. Harris, you're on overwatch, top of that ridge. Cole, you're with me. Her commands were clipped and efficient. She and Cole moved toward the cockpit section, their weapons scanning the surrounding trees. The data link module and the optics core were the prize. Sharma located the reinforced housing for the optics, a heavy, metallic sphere embedded deep within the drone's fuselage. It was damaged but intact. As Reyes and Thorne worked with specialized tools to cut it free, Sharma noticed something wrong. A set of fresh tracks in the snow, partially covered but unmistakable. They were not from her team. "Contact," she whispered into her radio. "Multiple hostiles, already on site." They're hiding before she could finish the sentence. The clearing erupted in gunfire. Muzzle flashes winked from the darkened tree line. Kadyrov's main force had not been on their way. They had already arrived. They had used the storm as cover, just as she had, and had set a trap. Echo Squadron was caught in a prepared ambush. Bullets ripped through the air, smacking into the drone's wreckage and kicking up plumes of snow. Harris, from his overwatch position, returned fire, his heavy machine gun laying down a suppressive barrage that forced some of the ambushers to keep their heads down. Sharma and Cole dove for cover behind the drone's main fuselage. "They're trying to pin us down," Cole yelled over the din of the firefight. "They have us surrounded." "They don't have us surrounded," Sharma corrected him, her voice tight but controlled as she peered around the edge of the wreckage. "They have a classic L-shaped ambush set up. Main force on that side," she pointed, "and a supporting element there. They've left the cliffside open. They think it's an impassable wall, so they're using it to funnel us into their kill zone." She saw the tactical problem with absolute clarity, even amidst the chaos and violence. She saw the enemy's mistake. "Thorne, Reyes, how long on that core?" She barked into the radio. 30 seconds, came the reply. "We don't have 30 seconds, Sharma said. She looked at Cole. "Give me your fragmentation grenades." All of them. Cole passed her 3 grenades without question. Sharma pulled the pin on the first one, cooked it for 2 seconds, and threw it with a smooth, powerful motion. Not at the enemy, but at a massive snowdrift that had accumulated at the base of the cliff face. The grenade exploded with a deafening roar, triggering a localized avalanche. A huge wall of snow and ice cascaded down, not on the enemy, but directly into the open space between the team and the ambushers, creating a massive, temporary wall of white. It was a visual and auditory screen, a sudden, violent alteration of the battlefield. "Go now," she screamed. "Move to the cliff base." The team scrambled through the churning snow cloud, disoriented but alive. The enemy's fire became sporadic and inaccurate as their line of sight was completely obscured. Under the cover of her improvised smokescreen, the entire team repositioned themselves against the rock wall the enemy had assumed was a barrier. Reyes and Thorne dragged the heavy optics core with them. "Now what?" Cole asked, breathing heavily. "They'll rush us as soon as that snow settles." "That's what they think we think," Sharma said. She pointed up the sheer rock face. "We're going up. Harris, cover our ascent." It was the same suicidal plan she had rejected earlier, but the circumstances had changed. They were not climbing blind in a blizzard. They were climbing to escape a kill box with a dedicated overwatch to protect them. It was no longer a reckless gamble. It was their only chance of survival. With a shared look of grim understanding, the team began to climb, leaving the enemy to stare at an empty cloud of snow, completely outmaneuvered by a commander who saw the environment not as an obstacle, but as a weapon. The debriefing room back at Forward Operating Base Kestrel was cold and sterile. The remnants of Echo Squadron sat around a metal table, exhausted, grimy, and frostbitten, but alive. The recovered optics core and data link module sat in a secure case on the center of the table, a testament to their success. The door opened and Captain Miller entered, looking pale but steady on his feet, followed by 2 stern-faced men in the uniforms of the Judge Advocate General's Corps. Then, behind them, Rear Admiral Anya Sharma entered the room. She was no longer in tactical gear. She wore a crisp, clean service uniform, the silver star of her rank gleaming on her collar. A stunned silence fell over the operators. Cole's face went white, a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. He stared at her, his mind struggling to connect the quiet woman from the bar, the brilliant tactician from the storm, with the high-ranking flag officer standing before him. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Her presence at the base, her quiet observation, the way Thorne had deferred to her, it all made sense now. He had not just shoved an analyst. He had assaulted an admiral. Captain Miller cleared his throat. "Echo Squadron," he began, his voice strained. "As you are now aware, Rear Admiral Sharma was here conducting a command-level assessment of this unit's operational readiness." Her review is now complete, he gestured for Sharma to speak. Sharma stepped forward, her gaze sweeping across the men at the table. Her eyes rested on Cole for a moment, not with anger, but with a dispassionate, evaluative intensity. My assessment is twofold, she said, her voice the same calm, even tone she had used throughout the entire ordeal. First, regarding the mission. Despite extreme environmental conditions and a well-laid enemy ambush, you successfully recovered a critical strategic asset and returned with 0 friendly casualties. Your performance under fire, your core skills, and your teamwork were exemplary. Master Chief Thorne, Petty Officer Reyes, your actions were commendable. She then turned her attention to Cole, Harris, and Reyes. However, my assessment of this squadron's command climate and discipline is far less positive. What I observed prior to the mission was a culture of unchecked ego, a lack of professional respect, and a dangerous disregard for protocol. This culture directly led to Specialist Cole's insubordination and assault in the Wolf's Den. One of the legal officers stepped forward with a file. Specialist Cole, he said in a flat voice, you are hereby charged under the Uniform Code of Military Justice with assault on a superior commissioned officer, conduct unbecoming and dereliction of duty. You will be placed under restriction pending a court-martial. Harris and Reyes flinched as if struck. Cole simply stared at the table, his face a ruin of shame. He did not protest. He did not make excuses. He had no defense. Sharma let the weight of the moment settle in. However, she continued, and the room grew even quieter, I also observed Specialist Cole's conduct during the mission. After his initial errors in judgment, he followed orders without question. He performed his duties effectively, and he risked his own life to help secure the objective. She looked at the legal officers. My official report will reflect his actions during the operation, which I will recommend be taken as a mitigating factor during sentencing. He failed as a man. He did not fail as a warrior. She then looked directly at Cole. You are strong, Specialist. You are brave. But you mistake aggression for strength. You mistake volume for authority. The mission was successful not because of brute force, but because of discipline, observation, and the ability to adapt. We did not defeat the mountain by punching it. We defeated it by understanding it. You have the potential to be a great operator, but not until you learn that lesson. Her words were not a condemnation, but a clinical diagnosis. The consequences were not an act of revenge, but the logical outcome of his own actions. The respect she had earned from the team had not been demanded. It had been forged in the ice and fire of the mission. Master Chief Thorne met her eyes from across the room and gave a slow, deliberate nod. It was a silent acknowledgement from one veteran to another, a shared understanding that the institution, for all its flaws, had a way of righting itself. The culture of the squadron had been tested, and a necessary, painful correction had been made. The sun was rising, painting the desert sky in hues of orange and purple. The storm had passed, leaving the air clean and cold. Anya Sharma stood on the perimeter of the base, looking out at the jagged peaks of the Dragon's Teeth, now serene and majestic in the morning light. The fury of the previous night seemed like a distant dream. The sounds of the base coming to life, the rumble of engines, the shouts of men, the metallic clang of equipment, were a familiar backdrop. Her work here was done. The report was filed. The necessary chains of command were in motion. Cole would face his punishment, but her recommendation would likely save his career, if he was wise enough to learn from it. The squadron would heal stronger and more disciplined for the harsh lesson it had received. She heard footsteps on the gravel behind her. It was Master Chief Thorne. He stopped a few feet away, holding 2 steaming mugs. He offered one to her. Coffee, Admiral, he said, the title now natural and respectful. She took the mug, the warmth seeping into her cold hands. Thank you, Master Chief. They stood in silence for a long moment, watching the sunrise. They were 2 very different people from 2 different worlds, the flag officer from the world of strategy and policy, and the senior enlisted leader from the world of mud and blood. Yet they shared a common language, one spoken in action rather than words. You know, Thorne said, his voice a low rumble, the kid's going to be okay. You did him a favor. I did the service a favor, she corrected him gently. A weapon that cannot be controlled is a danger to its wielder. Fair enough, Thorne conceded. He took a sip of his coffee. Still, not many officers I know would have handled it that way. In the bar or out on that mountain. There is only one way to handle things, she said, her gaze fixed on the distant peaks. The right way, he nodded slowly, accepting the simple, profound truth of her statement. He finished his coffee, gave her another nod of respect, and walked away, leaving her alone with her thoughts. She watched the last of the stars fade from the sky as the sun crested the horizon, flooding the valley with light. The world was full of noise, of ego, of men who believed their own stories. But the mountain did not care for stories. The storm did not care for rank. The enemy did not care for arrogance. They only yielded to quiet competence, to the disciplined application of will. It was the only truth that had ever mattered. Strength is not the power to dominate, but the discipline to control what power you have.